Welcome to Your Next Tech Startup. I'm host Isabel Rasmussen. Today we are speaking about engineering leadership and thinking about building hiring process from a point of trust versus oftentimes how I think interview processes are approached where people think, oh, is this resume real? Is the code that this person submitted real? And how that can impact things negatively versus coming at it from a point of believing that the candidate is who they say they are, the code is theirs.
Hey everyone, this is Amey. I lead AI at Nexla, and most of my life I've built large-scale data systems handling over petabytes sort of data. So excited to share my learning so far about hiring.
Yes. And when I was looking over your LinkedIn, I called out that you started your career joining a startup that was then acquired by Google. So you got to have an amazing start with your career, currently in the startup space, and you've hired about 50 engineers. Surprisingly, you told me that you've probably only conducted 100 to 200 interviews, which to hire 50 engineers is baffling to me. I typically conduct for each hire at least 40 interviews and have interviewed thousands of engineers at this point. You said that in part you do that because you always start with a coding interview.
Yeah,
So do you want to talk about that?
yeah. So typically before I start the process and like try to kind of visualize what am I exactly hiring for, part of
Mhm.
that is just like writing the job description, but more or less is about if this person were to join the team tomorrow, kind of what would they exactly be doing and what would success for them look like? And
Okay.
I typically have a repository of my own where certain interesting problems that I solve at my work,
Mhm.
I would think of this, oh, this is a good interview candidate question because this is something that somebody
Okay.
can do either within an hour or 2 hours, either in a face-to-face interview or even as a take-home challenge.
And so that just to clarify, I love that idea of whether you're hiring or not hiring, just in general, kind of always be thinking about hiring. And so when you're, thinking about a like, oh, this is a good problem to have a discussion about, even if in that quarter not hiring, you're organized and you're saving that.
Yeah, I learned this at the first startup that you mentioned that I was at. Hiring is an always on problem. You're always looking to hire best candidates, and as a startup, you don't have that many choices. So you putting in that effort can go a long way in how well you succeed. That is definitely always in the back of my mind. To come back to the challenge itself, I think the key part about the challenge is it should reflect what an actual person in the team is going to do, that particular
Yeah.
task. It should also reflect that that task can be done in that allotted time.
Yeah.
Get a problem.
And you're saying like you're making sure that, this is something that can be done in 1 to 2 hours. Is that what you
I
mean?
typically try to aim for that. I find it a little bit uncomfortable to ask someone to spend 4 hours of their life on a interview challenge. So 2 hours is where my cap is. But I've also done take-home challenges which the time limit was an hour. And it's a very precise like programming problem. Another challenge largely is ensuring that they can use the tools that are available to them as they would on their work life, which is whatever ID they use. They can use Google now, everybody can use ChatGPT. But even if they were to solve this as an open book exam, there is enough meat in the problem that they would need to think. And part of the way of problem framing is that they would also want to enjoy solving that problem.
I don't think I've ever heard an engineering manager say that, is that you want to give them a problem that they're going to enjoy doing.
Right. One way to do that is to have a little bit of more creative exploration that is possible, to lay down the baseline. Here is the bare minimum you need to do. If you don't do this, then we are probably just going to say goodbye and good luck and move on from each other. Give them directionally, hey, you can probably go in this direction or in some other direction. We would love to know more about what direction you go in. Uh,
Okay, and so when you send them the take home assignment, it explains like this is what the bare minimum is. This is, we're looking for creativity, we're looking for these things. And then I'm guessing you're also calling out, is it okay to use AI to solve this take home? And, and how are you exactly addressing that in the prompt?
Typically, I used to have 15-minute introductory calls to just introduce this topic. Now have kind of almost evolved
Okay.
into just sending emails where if somebody reaches out to me, I'll send them an email describing everything or what is expected. But more importantly, and this is actually a key skill that I look for, because I have gone through the effort and I've written a very detailed doc. Problem statement, what's
Mhm,
expected, what is not expected, where do you go, what are evaluation questions. In a remote first team, or at least in the world that we live in today, I want to understand whether
mhm.
you can read that doc and actually understand the problem correctly.
Okay.
If somebody does not pay attention to that, then that actually is a yellow flag in my mind.
Mhm. Have you thought about using Loom to send as your prompt to do the exercise? But I guess that's that kind of written versus verbal following.
I think part also as a startup, I want to use those first 15 minutes to also like attract candidates, because I think having that face-to-face conversation does give them
Yeah.
a notion of, okay, I actually want to work for this guy, or I do want to solve this take-home challenge. Because there is something that I'm
Mhm.
asking of the candidate, which is I want 1 or 2 hours of your life to work on this challenge, which I think is a decent commitment. So I think showing that 15 minutes of commitment from my side at least hopefully motivates him to do that. The reason why I've stopped doing it now is just largely bandwidth reasons of my own, where I don't have enough time to maybe do those 15-minute calls.
So, like, is your recruiter talking to the candidate before you're sending the take home
It's
exercise?
largely me,
Okay.
right? I'd like to have the
Okay. Yeah.
conversation rather.
Yeah. I do think in general, if you're going to ask someone for a couple hours of their time, that's why I think it's good to utilize your recruiter or someone on the team that can support and promote the opportunity, answer questions before jumping into a take home.
Yeah,
Let's
that's a fair point. The reason why I prefer me over a recruiter is I think I can give them all of this information about what I went in to make this challenge.
Mhm.
I think gives them a little bit more intimacy about like, okay, this is a process that is
Yeah.
meant for me to succeed rather than against me. That's what I'm really trying to establish the trust upfront there.
Yeah. I'm always thinking about recruiting processes. So to me, like because of time commitments and all of that, if you have your recruiter, and I think that recruiter screen is like pitch the company, like is this person able to speak through problems that they've worked on, ask them something about how they work with others, get some kind of culture feed, can they communicate their work, can they explain how they work with others, baseline, get that. There's no point in them doing the technical interview if they can't pass that baseline. I know you can personalize looms, but then you have a set loom that you're explaining the exercise and you're pitching in that loom like, hey, this is some of the things about our engineering culture, interesting problems that we're working with on our team, and this is the why behind the exercise, what's important, what I'm looking for. And then you also have, some of that like laid out because like you said, for remote first, you want to make sure that they're following directions, have that all laid out for them, and then you get your submittals. And then one of the things, that I've talked with hiring managers about is this whole idea of, do you guarantee an interview if they submit the homework? And I find in general, to get people to do the homework, the best way to do that is to set, okay, here's the homework assignment, and you have a set interview next week to talk with one of the engineers about the homework assignment. And then when and you have to turn in the homework assignment within like 24 hours prior to that set conversation so that the person has time to review it. And then if they turn that in and it is just garbage, or I don't know if garbage is the right word, but if it's like the in-person or the phone interviews is there's no way to save this, then, as honest of feedback as possible, provide that and then cancel that interview. But your process is if the person sends back good, like something that you feel like is worth a conversation, then you're having that conversation with them. Is that right?
Correct. The current
Yeah.
process, at least that we do, is we have a document that describes the problem in detail, or at least as much detail I think we have put in enough effort on, and then we give them a data set. We give them a general overview of what they should expect. Typically, I ask them
Mhm.
for 2 hours of their time and send me when they can do the take home challenge. I will schedule an email that will send them the challenge information half an hour before those 2 hours would begin, so that they actually get half an hour to think about the problem in just isolation. And then my expectation is that
Oh,
after 2 hours, they should ship an artifact, which is code that is working, that I can run. Because we also give very specific evaluation questions that, hey, at least this 5 questions should run and you should be able to validate your own work before sending it to us. I don't want to do 24 hours because I have seen in the past candidates end up spending an entire day trying to perfect the solution. Because
yeah.
is most people can write code today if they are like applying for jobs. I just like have that as a working assumption. Some people write it, some
Mhm.
people write it worse. In those 2 hours, you are given a time boxed problem and you have been explicitly given that instruction to. Can you solve the problem? That's really what I'm trying to assess. And then the next level is, are you able to solve that problem really well? So the only way that person does not get an additional interview is if they just did not solve the problem really well. If they solved it
Oh,
better, if they thought about 5 different things that even I did not think about or I learned, then that is a candidate I'm going to prioritize a lot more in the
mhm.
process for them, or I may figure out a very different interview loop for them at that point in time. So that's kind of how the end result of the take home challenge is evaluated.
Okay.
We use,
And I want to call out, I'll say I have never heard of time boxing without like an assessment tool.
yeah,
Interesting.
it's
Normally I say, please don't spend more than 90 minutes on this and please get it back to us within 72 hours or whatever. But that's going back to what we had originally in regards to having this conversation around trust. And it's like trusting them to kind of like follow those guidelines. But it is, and to me, this isn't a trust issue. This is just like, people kind of go down rabbit holes. And it becomes a fairness issue when you say, please only spend 90 minutes on this exercise. And that some people only spend 90 minutes on it, and then other people spend 5 hours on it, and then they're evaluated on the same criteria is complicated and I feel like it's
yeah.
impossible for
I
me
actually
as a recruiter. But the way you've set up the honestly the perfect I love that idea is that because you can set it up in your ATS system, whatever, this email goes out. But I've never thought of a take home and getting a person to say, I will do this take home exercise between 2 and 4 p.m. on Tuesday, and then you send the prompt at 1:30, and then the expectation is before 5 p.m. they have sent you the code back
correct.
or
Correct. And I'm
submit.
very explicit about that. That if they don't send the code, like in between those 2.5 hours, let's say, I will actually disqualify them. So it's a
Okay.
requirement that they should time box themselves and like work towards getting a solution. So part of that is also a little bit of judgment for startups specifically, which is, can you be scrappy? You have to solve problems
Okay.
very quickly at startups. And I think this
Yeah.
implicitly assesses that skill set also. The reason why it's all set up this way is I did not wanted to like use CoderPad or any of those tools. It just creates, I think, more work for me. So this is more of an honor system
Mhm.
where I am explicitly telling you, I'm going to trust you to do this. You can use whatever you want.
Yeah.
Solve the problem,
Mhm.
solve it well, and I think we'll have a much better process going forward.
Yeah. And then they solve the problem, and then you normally get on the phone with them.
I typically would
Or
evaluate the challenge. The expectation is that they have given me a code artifact that I can run and validate their
okay.
work. And of course, we have a few other questions that we don't show the candidates, that we run it over just to see whether this was a problem that, and this is kind of where most candidates run into issues, because if they just use ChatGPT or an O1 model or O3 model to get a solution for it, it is going to miss some nuances, no matter how good AI is. There has been a thought process in the problem to kind of overcome those hacks that somebody would have just done without thinking too much about the problem. And then based on that, we just respond to the candidate with, hey, this is great work that you did. We'd like to move ahead in the process.
Mhm.
And the reason why I don't do that call is I also expect them to send me a README with written description of what they did. So that is also another artifact in those 2 hours. And of course, all of this is mentioned upfront, right? That's why that first half an hour is given to you. to think through it, articulate the problem. And I have personally found people are a lot more better in communication when you ask them to write down things. It makes you focus, it makes you be prescriptive about your work. So I use that
Yeah.
readme also as a barometer for judging people in terms of whether they should, if they have done well, then it's more about how quickly to prioritize this candidate. Where do they fit on the a scale of like the candidates that we have seen so far? And then they go through a very short interview loop where, dependent on the role, we would have either a system design interview or largely a culture interview. Because we are a startup, I think culture interviews for startup is actually a good thing. And then if all things look good, we kind of make an offer at that level.
Okay. And so to clarify with that, then you're not having them do any live coding.
Now, and I don't use any
Okay.
ATS or anything where I can like see what they were doing. I trust the artifact that they give me, that they have put in an honest effort. And
Mhm.
the other two interviews, if let's say somebody hasn't, would kind of weed that out very quickly.
So the full interview process is take home challenge, then systems design, culture.
And then if it comes to an offer, it's just largely an offer conversation.
Oh, that's a really short
Yeah.
process.
I mean, as a startup, you have to hire
Okay.
people really quickly, right? Whenever like things are there. And I don't think you have a, especially now, I think everyone has so much opportunity. I think accelerating the process is really good. One other change that we do for very senior candidates is we kind of
Mhm.
have them present work for 45 minutes about the best work they have done so far. And
Okay.
the presentation can involve slides, it could involve a doc, or it could involve straight up code because they are presenting to engineers at the end of the day on the other side.
And I'm assuming someone, I mean, because I don't like the stereotypes that often come with engineers, but skills and it tends to be a sales brain and an engineering brain
Yeah.
and sales brain are not often the
Right.
same brain.
It's-
But are they stakeholder engagement is an important part of that role if they're that at that point in their career? Is that where the presentation comes into play as and are you judging them on presentations like
No, I think
skill?
what we are judging them for, so most, I think engineering companies do this notion of a design review where an
Yeah.
engineer presents their work to other engineers about what they have done. So that is the forum
Okay.
and the expectation that, hey, you are presenting work to other engineers to kind of learn from your work. The idea is to take one project that you really enjoyed or were, and maybe you didn't enjoy, and there were a lot of learnings from there. Let us know for about 45 minutes, kind of educate them. What we have seen is that leads to a lot of good conversations between the people listening and the people presenting, especially if it's like well thought through problem statement. Presentation, I think I've had mixed luck on that. Some people present slides exceptionally well, some people present code exceptionally well. And if they're presenting code in a language that's not familiar to the audience, that becomes a
Mhm.
challenge. So that's something that I
Mhm.
have tried to fine tune, where we kind of tell people, hey, our engineering stack is so and so. It would be ideal if you can present work in this programming language rather than any
Yeah.
other language. I am a decently polyglot as a programmer, so I can understand a decent amount of mainstream languages. But if like somebody comes and tries to present work in like Clojure, that's gonna like be really hard for me to also evaluate, even though I think I can evaluate Lisp even now.
What language are you working in right now?
Largely Python.
Your team,
Python.
Python. So are you requiring Python as a prerequisite for the engineer?
Correct. I don't think people would be successful in my team if they are not a very advanced Python programmer right now.
Well, I would say with the focus, your focus is you're building on an AI team, and so Python is the go-to language in regards to that. So that makes sense in that space.
Yeah.
Um, okay. So yeah. And so because if you have you need to be strong in Python and then ideally then you're presenting in Python, like that works. And then for some people they have a different project that they're excited about and just making sure that the language is something that everybody can be comfortable
And
with.
that's put out in the job description. Like if you apply with
Yeah.
someone who's like a very strong Go programmer or a Java programmer, I'm very hesitant to take that time unless they have either written an email to me describing why they want to do this and what would kind of take for them. If they are a senior engineer, I'm more willing to kind of be open to that. But for a junior engineer, I'm not, because we are just not in that place where we can nurture some person like that.
Yeah. And then I'm assuming that the take-home exercise has to be done in Python.
It doesn't have to be. It's best if it is because it's easy to judge.
Okay.
But I have seen somebody do the take home challenge even in a Google Sheet, which is the most funniest thing that I had seen, where somebody wrote an app script program and sent it to me. And I was kind of amazed that they did that. But yeah, I would say Python is probably the first choice. A lot of people have also used C++. A lot of people have also used
Mhm.
R to do the current set of take home challenges that I do.
So, okay, I'm just, I'm curious and like so the idea, so Python is a requirement for the role. And this is again going kind of back to that trust piece. I'm assuming that when you're looking at the resume, if the resume does not have Python experience, that most of the time you are rejecting the candidate. So you're trusting the resume and the fact that they have Python experience. And then they're doing the take home challenge. They ideally are doing that in Python. You have candidates that are not. And the rest of the interview process is not involved, like they don't have to demonstrate their ability to code or think of like work in Python,
Correct.
or maybe during the systems design.
No, we don't ask
It-
Python specific questions even during system design. Like we would ask you to do pseudo code. But at that point, we would test thoroughly certain distributed systems principles, for example. Certain
okay.
computer science problems that we solve on a day-to-day basis, we would like you to go deep into those. And then again, language is like a matter of choice there. Just to
Okay.
put one more point about the resume too, I would not reject every candidate flatly if they haven't done Python, as long as their resume has enough work that I can parse and understand relatively quickly.
I've worked with hiring managers where it's like, okay, they either have to be a strong Python engineer or a very strong polyglot. As far as I'm concerned, if you've spent the last 10 years in one language, you aren't demonstrating to me that you are very flexible in learning languages quickly because you've stayed in one language for a long time.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think if like someone has been building distributed systems in either C++ or Go or
Uh-huh.
Java, I would actually
Okay.
talk to them
Okay.
and I would
But then so
and I
you
would let them do the take home challenge in the language of their choice. Are they open to
yeah.
learning that stack? Are they open to criticizing that stack and like be successful in that stack? Because it's a pretty
Okay.
commitment on their side also to do that.
Okay. So you are treating Python more as a nice to have than as a like a requirement.
It's not a hard and fact constraint, is I think what
Okay.
I'm trying to say. But I would
Yeah, because I was thinking like the way that you run your process, if it isn't like 100% of the time, day one, you have to be amazing at Python. But if you had that expectation, I would think that you would have had someone who is not very strong in Python. I don't think that's a huge deal because smart engineers figure it out
like,
and ramp up quickly. But
and this is all like my biases based on like my career and my growth, and a large part of that comes from the first startup that I worked at, where I worked with exceptionally really good people. And over there, it was more of a matter of generalists who can
mhm,
solve computer science problems really well. And I think
yeah.
if you try to find generalists, they typically do well. That I have definitely changed my mindset a little bit about that, where certain specific problems, especially now, like I think not everybody can be a good prompt engineer. That I actually do believe that at this point. Same thing I would say applies for building like distributed data systems. Not everyone is just going to naturally gravitate towards building those systems. So we do want to
Mhm,
fine tune for those, and that's kind of where the system design interview is largely for. So I treat the take home challenge as this is somebody that we should definitely talk to. And if they do exceedingly well, then we should prioritize them. System design interviews to kind of fine tune that deep level of understanding of computer science and the problems we are solving as a business. Because, for example, if someone is a cryptocurrency expert, they are not necessarily going to benefit us a lot with the current company that I am at. So
mhm.
it may not be the best fit in that standpoint.
Yeah. And then let's talk about pass through rates for a moment. For the take home challenge, off the top of your head, do you have an idea of like what your pass through rate is?
I think over the last 15 months, it's probably been about 30-35%.
Okay, so that's a little low for a pass through rate.
Mhm.
And then for the kind of the final stages for your system design interview? Do you have a sense
Yeah,
of what
that
the
is actually
pass-through
much
rate
higher.
is?
Like that is probably closer to like 70.
Okay. That is like what I think is a good process is when you have an I don't know if anyone can explain it, but in general, 50% pass-through rates are the norm. And so, but like sometimes, there's that balancing out. So if you have a 30% pass-through rate at one stage, then the next stage should be a higher pass-through rate. So you're 30% and you're like 60 to 70%, like balance each other out. And to me, that is a sign of like you're running a good, effective process. Like if you have a 30% pass through rate and then after that you have like a 15% pass through rate, like something is very wrong. And then on the culture side, are you about 50-50 on your pass through rate?
No, but actually probably the same because I think uh, part of the take home challenge also filters out a little bit for the culture part, whether are they scrappy, are they going to get things done, do they align to the startup velocity and all of those aspects, right? So I would say I included that 70% as a hit rate for both system design and the culture.
Okay.
There's one additional point I maybe wanted to also make, which is when we reject candidates, I personally write an email explaining to them exactly what they missed out in the take home challenge.
Oh, wow. That's so rare.
Here were like the minimum things that you should have at least paid attention to. And there
Hmm.
are typically two obvious modes of failures that most candidates have ran into. So
Okay.
writing the message becomes almost a template thing at this point in time for me. But I have
Mhm.
always tried to do that, which is I have always personally hated the idea of like getting an email where somebody says some cookie cutter message.
Yeah, thank you, but no thank you, which I've sent thousands and thousands of those cookie cutter messages because I don't really fully understand, like, if I just get a no, we're rejecting them for their take home, like, I, yeah, I can't explain to them why.
Yeah.
So, but that's really great that you do that. And I wish that I have another episode where the hiring manager speaks about doing that as well. But in as for my career, I've never worked with a hiring manager who's done that. Like I'm sure that there are so many engineers that are grateful for you for doing that. And allows them to grow and be better engineers too, in regards to like how they think about their interviews. All
Yeah.
right. Well, I really appreciate everything that you have shared. I guess I would love if you're open to it to if we could have some kind of like if I could include in the description
I'll search in my archives and see what I can find.
anything else that you kind of wanted to add before we wrap up.
I think I'll explain the motivation for why I did take home challenge, which I didn't maybe get to.
Okay.
The reason why I did this is because I genuinely dislike the notion of lead code and how I
Mhm.
think it puts pressure on candidates. And I think one part of that comes from also because I don't think I am myself very good at lead code, but it also does not make a good assessment of my own ability or talent. I don't think lead code is particularly bad as a learning exercise. But I do think asking candidates to do that in like 20, 30 minutes for a fairly complicated problem is almost like competitive programming compressed in one time, which does not seem a great choice for what actually the candidate's going to do.
Yeah, I think those like really tight time frame things are a great way of rejecting great candidates. Like if you want to just say no to a lot of really good software engineers, then make them jump through a lot of ridiculous hoops. I think all of the engineers interviewing right now appreciate that you are very thoughtful and caring about your process and want it to be something that makes sense. And honestly, it's the shortest interview process I've heard of.
And I've learned from good
So the
people. It's not necessarily just my own created that are put.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with like, I think, can you code? Can you do this? Can you think through the system design aspect of it? Are you someone that other people want to work with? Then great. Like having people like so many interview processes have people do three different rounds of coding interviews and it comes from this like mistrust. So I think that you have a great process and I appreciate you sharing it so that others can learn from it and think about how to design their interview processes differently. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of that with us.
Yep. Bye bye, Isabel.